Okay, today we want to talk about how data is passed back and forth between the client and the server by using what we call sessions or session cookies. Okay, now when we talk about how information goes from the browser to the web server, one of the problems that arises when we're using HTTP is that whenever the browser sends information to the server or actually requests some of the information, the server sends the information back to the browser, but then it drops the connection. So any data is lost. It ends up at the browser, but we have to have a way to identify data and store it just as long as we're in a session, which means a browser has not been closed, you're in the session, or it doesn't time out. So when we look at this, how do we accomplish this? When we work with sessions in PHP, the client still goes to the server and requests a page. At that point in time, it creates a session and assigns it an ID. An ID is randomly picked, and it's a very long ID. And any information that travels back and forth between the browser and the server has a session ID attached to it. So that's how we associate data with it. Now, think of it as a storage area where we store data. We can store variables inside the session. We can store arrays inside the session. So let's take a look at the one that you have now. Okay, in here, we've got a simple shopping cart. It's kind of like the last half of what we started in our last video, but we do not have the information that does the billing portion of it. It only updates the cart. So I have all of my items listed here that I can choose to purchase. And again, just for educational and for efficiency here, these are coded. We're not pulling from a database. So if I want to buy a trumpet with a quantity of 1, I add the item. Now at this point in time, we have to have already started the session. But when I add this item to the cart, it takes us to the cart, tells us we have a quantity of 1 with a total, and then we have a subtotal. Now if I, want to change the quantity, I have to go and change it here and update. So it goes in and updates the session variable. However, we're keeping all of our cart inside a session variable or a session array. And remember, we're working with associative arrays where we're not using indexes, we're using the names. And if I want to empty it out, as it says right here, I enter a quantity of 0. And I can go back to add the item and I can empty the entire cart. Okay, so I can go in and add here. If I want to go back to add an item, just view cart, it'll go back and forth. At all points in time when we change information or add or delete, we are updating our session. It will stay in the session until I close this out. And if I empty the cart, it empties the array out of the session. So let's look at some code now. And remember, this is where we started off, really, our index. Okay? So the first thing you must do, and I'm looking at the index that you have, is to create a persistent cookie for this session, meaning that I'm giving it a lifetime. This is just one of the variables that are automatically set with a cookie or exists. Now, if I want to delete a cookie, I'm just going to set this lifetime to something like 5 seconds in the future or something in the past. So I have to create the cookie, give it a lifetime, use the session set cookie parameter, and then I start the cookie. All right, now we're set up to load data inside our session. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I need to check to see if this is the first time in the page or if I already have things inside my cart. Now if the session, and I'm going to call it cart 12. Let's remember, that's just a name I've given it. If it's empty, then I'm going to create the array, and really this is just emptying out the array that's in cart 12 in my session. Now, this, I'm creating just a table or an array of the products that we can purchase. Now remember, I'm putting these in under a unique ID. It's like this is the primary key, and my array has a name and a cost. And I'm loading it with the data. Okay, this is just instead of rolling it from a database. And I'm requiring my cart PHP once. Now I'll come back to that. I want to continue on. Now remember, our actions come from page to page. And we must get this action either using a post, assuming our form used a post, and if not, use a get. And we've gone over these several times. So once I have my action, I'm ready to look at what I need to do. Was the action an add? If it's an add, then I need to go in and add the product key and the item quantity and add those two pieces. And then go back and view the cart. If I'm just updating, that means it already exists, but I need to go after the new quantity. And again, I'm looking at the new quantity. I'm building a list from it. There's my validation. And here's the array. Here's the individual that I'm working with. And the key, of course, remember, we're using associative. So here I can look in and see, does it already exist in our session? Well, since it's an update, it should. But I need to check to see if my cart 12 under my key for the quantity is not equal to my quantity that I've taken in. Then I need to update it. That means that I had a 2 in here and I chose a 1. So remember, this is just the way I'm getting my quantity from the variable that's changed. And if it's different, then I need to update the item in my session, calling the function update item. And then we have some of the others that doesn't really work a whole lot with the session, but if we want to show a cart, go get that file, add item, that file, and if we want to empty out the cart, then remember, we unset the session and the array. You can look inside the PowerPoint slides and see all these commands that we've included. All right, now let's go back and look at what that entails. So remember, if I add an item, puts it in the cart. If I already have an item in here, like the flute's already there, but I'm going to do a quantity, it does not add another flute. It just updates the quantity and adds to it. So that's where we're looking. If it already exists, we need to change the quantity. If I change the quantity here, again, it's going to be different than what is stored inside the session. So it updates it and updates the total. Let's go back to our code. So let's go in and look at our cart PHP. Now the cart PHP includes all of those, functions that we call depending upon what we've done to the cart. So when we add item, and remember that's in our actions that brought the key and the quantity, I want to make sure that there is still a quantity. If there's not a quantity, then I don't need to do anything to it. If it already exists in the cart, then I need to set the key that's been passed through to cart 12 in my session. I need to go in and take what is already in the cart and add it to the quantity that came through here. And then I call my update and I return. Okay. Now, if it's not already here, then I simply go through and set all of my variables. If for my array, remember I already got the key, and here it comes. I set all of them, and again I have my total. Normally I wouldn't store something that I can already calculate from existing variables, but this makes it efficient and quicker. Plus it's just a little storage. Once I get all that, then I go ahead and take the array and add it to the array that's already cart 12 for the session. Now let's go back and see if it's already existing. I want to update the item. So I have to take the quantity that came in. Remember, they're all working with, and I want to make it an integer. Then I want to see, I got to pull it up because it exists. If the quantity is less than or equal to 0, I delete that from my array. Remember, I already told them that inside the page. If it's not here, then I need to update the quantity in the cart 12 of that record with the quantity that I've brought through. I need to calculate the cost times the quantity to get the total, and these are the one in the session. And then I set the session to my total, my array portion. And looking at this, realize this is nothing new. We've always done cost times quantity. It's just that now we're working with session variables. So you have to add the whole part in front of it. Also remember, I'm just working with an array. If I could have a session called cost and a session called quantity. They're just variables in a storage position. Now once I go through there, at some point I'll want to call the function get subtotal, and again I simply go through the session. I've called them items. Remember, we already went over that. And I add them all up. And then I just format it. Now this also is one that's called when I actually click the update item from here. And it goes through and looks at all of these. It doesn't know exactly which one I updated, but it knows one of them has. So it has to check all of them. So I'm going to go back to my index. And we have to make sure anytime we're showing any new information, like when I do my cart view, anytime I want to access any of the data, remember, I have to go after the session. So here again, if my cart is empty, or the count of the number of items in cart are 0, then we want to display you haven't got any items. Otherwise, we want to go through and display each session item that we have here. Just a name. These are just our names that we've been using. I could have used any name. Okay. And we bring up each one and display all of it. And at some point we do have our links that determine what our action is. This is really all we've worked with in these sessions. Just remember the format. You have to set it. And at some point in time, you may want to have a destroy in there whenever you actually quit. Otherwise, it'll be destroyed whenever we leave. The cookie may still remain, though, if we've written it out as a lifetime. With 2 weeks. It'll be destroyed in 2 weeks. I may have to destroy it myself. And here's all the different things we work with the arrays. Remember, set it up, create it with all the variables. Anytime we create it, we just set the session, the name we're using, and assign it. If you need any more help with sessions, you can also look over the slides or contact me. Also, there's some links that I've posted that discuss sessions with PHP. You can look at the PHP book. It's the new book, remember, I've posted out there of the missing link. Has some in it. Good luck.